The phone rang at 6:47 in the morning. 6:47. I know because I was watching the microwave clock, waiting for my coffee to finish, and the green numbers read 6:46 when the first ring hit and 6:47 when I picked up. The voice on the other end was Henry Castellan, the chairman of the board of the company I had spent 11 years helping my wife build from a one-room sublet into a 9-figure empire. I knew Henry's voice the way you know the sound of a faucet that has been dripping all winter. Instantly, and because you'd been hearing it for too long. Henry did not say good morning. Henry said, "Marcus, we need you back in the building by 10. I sat down on the kitchen stool. Not because I chose to. My knees just stopped agreeing to hold me up. The coffee machine beeped behind me, 3 sharp little beeps that sounded, in that precise moment, like a thing from a different universe. A universe where coffee was still the most important problem in the room. "Marcus, are you there?" "I'm here, Henry." "You understand what I'm asking?" "I understand what you're asking. I want to make sure I understand the why." A pause. Henry was not a man who paused. Henry Castellan had negotiated the purchase of 3 competitors, fired 2 chief executives, and remarried once, and he did all of it without a single audible breath that wasn't load-bearing. For Henry to pause meant Henry was about to tell me something he had not yet decided to tell me. Because the company is 48 hours from not existing, Marcus. Because Vivian removed you last Tuesday and the entire operational backbone of the business walked out the door with you. Because the Series C lead called me at 11 last night and told me, in language I am not going to repeat, that they are pulling the term sheet. And because Vivian, your wife, my former chief executive, was served with her own divorce papers this morning by your attorney, and I suspect you know more about that than I do. The microwave clock ticked over to 6:48. 48 hours. That was the country we were living in now. 48 hours between the company my wife and I had built and the place where that company had never existed at all. 48 hours between the version of my life where I was a husband who also happened to be a co-founder, and the version where I was just a man whose wife had erased him from the family business and then, almost as an afterthought, from the family. I cleared my throat. "I'll call you back, Henry." "Marcus." I said I'll call you back. You have until 9:30. After 9:30 the board moves to dissolution. I am not in a position to give you more. I hung up. The coffee was still hot. I poured it into the mug I'd been using for 14 years, the white one with the chip on the rim that Audrey had dropped when she was 4, and I sat at the kitchen island across from the stool where Vivian used to sit when she watched the markets open. Her spot was empty. Her spot had been empty for almost a week. The divorce attorney had used the word vacated when he described what she'd done with the house. I didn't like that word. Vacated sounded like a hotel checkout. Vacated sounded like something done officially. I want to back this up because the part that comes next only makes sense if you understand what came before. And what came before is a thing I keep rewriting in my own head, looking for the version where I did something different, where I saw it coming, where I was not, in my daughter's eventual phrase, the last person in the room to figure it out. Vivian and I met at a fundraising dinner in 2014. She was 26. I was 28. She was running operations for a meal kit startup that had 800 active subscribers and a credit card balance I remember to this day because she told it to me like a confession, $41,236, all of it personal, none of it company. I was 2 years out of business school, a junior consultant at a firm in Chicago that paid me well enough to forget I was not yet the person I had been told I was going to become. I saw her across the ballroom of the Drake Hotel and I had the unearned, completely irrational thought, I am going to marry that woman. 6 weeks later I moved in. For months after that I wrote her first investor deck. 11 months after that we were married in a courthouse in Santa Barbara because she didn't want the wedding to become a publicity event. The company was called Plate Theory when I met her. By the wedding it was Vitae Logistics. By the time Audrey, our daughter, was born, it was Vitae Group. By Audrey's 4th birthday it was Vesper Foods, valued at $940 million on a private secondary market I will not name because the people who run it are not proud of what happened next. I was the second employee. I built the systems. I walked into a freezing warehouse in Pilsen at 4 in the morning in 2017 because our refrigeration room had failed and the entire Q4 inventory was about to spoil. I renegotiated the lease on the headquarters on West Randolph in 2019 and got us an extra 18 months of runway in exchange for a paint job. I quietly rewrote Vivian's Series B pitch 6 times until it said something true. I sat, every Sunday night for 9 years, at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and figured out how to pay the next round of vendors. I was not on the pitch deck. I was in the basement. When Vivian called me from a parking lot in Palo Alto in 2021 and said, in the voice she used when something had just happened she was still deciding how to tell me, we need to renegotiate the Safeway contract before Tuesday, I did it between midnight and 4 in the morning on a Tuesday. I had also told my daughter I would attend her school play. I did not attend the play. I attended the contract. Vivian brought Audrey flowers afterward and Audrey forgave her because Audrey was 5 and forgave easily. I forgave myself later, or I tried to. I want to be careful here. I am not trying to make Vivian a villain. I am trying to make Vivian a person. The villain version makes for a better monologue at a comedy club in the West Loop, but it is not the version that is true, and I have made a private promise to tell the version that is true, even though it is going to take longer and have fewer good lines. What happened, between the years of our marriage and the week she fired me, was that Vivian started to believe a story about herself, and the story was not untrue, and that is what made it so dangerous. The story was this: Vivian had always been the smartest person in the room. Vivian had always been the most prepared person in the room. Vivian had always been the person who walked in and knew what the room needed before the room knew what the room needed. The story was true in 2014 and true in 2017 and, in fact, true in 2022. By 2025, the story had grown a barnacle. The barnacle was the belief that if Vivian was still the smartest person in the room, then anyone else in the room was, by definition, not. That anyone else in the room was, by definition, the reason the room was not yet what it could be. That anyone else in the room was, by definition, removable. I was removable. That was the barnacle. I did not see it because I was inside the same story Vivian was inside, and the story we were inside together was a different one. In my version, we were two people. In my version, one of us did more talking at investor meetings because the other was better at the kind of talking that made investors write checks. In my version, one of us woke up at 3 when the warehouse alarm triggered because the other was a deeper sleeper. In my version, neither of us was more important. In my version, the work was a thing we held between us like a hot pan. She came to see it differently in the spring of 2025. There was a specific meeting. I remember the date because the date was the date of our 9th wedding anniversary, and Vivian was in Zurich. I had surprised her with a trip to the Vier Jahreszeiten for the weekend, and she had flown out early, on Wednesday, for what she said was a soft diligence conversation with a German retailer. She had not told me the soft diligence conversation was, in fact, a hostile takeover bid she was preparing to launch against us, and she had not told me the German retailer was a vehicle for a competitor we had been beating in 3 of our 4 largest markets for 6 consecutive quarters. I learned both of these things 2 weeks later, from a Reuters reporter who called me on a Saturday. The reporter identified himself and said, with the cadence of a person who has been told to keep his voice neutral, Marcus, can you confirm or deny any relationship between Vivian Castellan, formerly Castellan Adler, and the Lumen Holdings fund out of Frankfurt? I was standing in the parking lot of a Target in Evanston. Audrey was inside, picking out a birthday present for her friend Marisol. I was holding 2 20-pound bags of dog food in each hand. I said, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I said it because I had not understood. I did not say it for dramatic effect. I had not understood. By June, Vivian had stopped sleeping in the bedroom. She had stopped sleeping in the bedroom for reasons she described as intensity, which I understood to mean, in retrospect, that the bedroom had, at least temporarily, become the place where I was most likely to be awake and listening, and she did not want me to be awake and listening. Vivian was a person who believed, in her bones, that what she was doing while she was awake and not telling me about could not, in any morally serious sense, be called betrayal, because betrayal is a thing that happens between two people who share a story about what they are doing, and we had, by the end of June, stopped sharing a story. In July she stopped using the name Castellan Adler on internal documents. In August she stopped using it on external documents. In September she stopped using it on her personal email. The paperwork for the legal name change had been filed, I learned much later, on the morning of our 9th anniversary. The Veer Jarosiden had not been a surprise. The Veer Jarosiden had been an alibi. I want to tell you what the last Tuesday felt like. I want to tell you what the last Tuesday looked like. I want to tell you what the last Tuesday sounded like, because the last Tuesday is, in some ways, the night this whole story is about, and the rest of what I am going to tell you is, in some ways, the after. The last Tuesday was a Tuesday in November. It was not a special Tuesday. It was the kind of Tuesday where I had a lunch at 12:30 with a private equity associate I had been trying to land for 2 months. It was the kind of Tuesday where Vivian was supposed to be in a brand strategy offsite in Bridgeport. It was the kind of Tuesday where Audrey had saxophone lessons at 4 and I had been asked, in writing, by Audrey, in a note she left on the kitchen counter written in the careful hand she uses when she wants me to take something seriously, to please be the one to pick her up because Mom kept promising and then not coming and it was starting, the note said, to feel embarrassing. I was at my desk on the 14th floor when Tess, my assistant of 9 years, knocked on the door at 2:14 p.m. and said, with a face I had never seen her make in 9 years of her knocking on my door at strange times, "Marcus, the general counsel needs you in Vivian's office. Now. With your laptop." I said, "Now." She said, "Now." I took the laptop off the docking station. The little disconnection noise the laptop makes when you unclick it from the dock was, in retrospect, the closest thing to a sound effect this story gets. Unclick. The system that had been running Vesper Foods for 9 years disconnected from the system that had been built by the person who was, as of the next 90 minutes, no longer going to be running Vesper Foods. I walked down the long hallway on the 14th floor. Most of it was open plan. Some of it was small conference rooms named after herbs. The Sage Room. The Rosemary Room. The Thyme Room. I had named those rooms early on because I believed, at the time, that naming them after herbs would make the office feel less like a thing built by a person who was trying to escape from a thing built by her father. I have always had a weakness for the kind of design choice that says, "Look, we are also a person." Vivian did not like the names. Vivian had not liked them in 2018 and Vivian had not liked them in 2024 and the look she gave me when I told her the room names in 2018 was, in retrospect, the first time she had looked at me like I was a thing she was considering returning. Her office was at the end of the hall. It had glass walls. I had always been proud of the glass walls. The glass walls meant, to me, that the company was not a thing you had to hide. The glass walls meant that the thing Vivian was building was a thing that could be seen. Vivian had allowed the glass walls because Vivian had, in 2018, still been a person who wanted to be seen building the thing. The man sitting across from Vivian was a man I did not recognize. He was wearing a navy suit I did not recognize. He was holding a folder I did not recognize. He stood when I walked in. Vivian did not stand. "Marcus, this is Bradford Halsey. Bradford runs the employment practice at Sidley. Bradford is going to walk you through a few things." I said, "A few things?" Vivian said, "A few things." Bradford Halsey had the kind of voice that I have, in the years since, come to associate with a particular class of lawyer, the kind of voice that has been professionally unbothered so many times that it can no longer take on the texture of what it is actually saying. He said, "Marcus, we've been asked by the company to sever your employment relationship with Vesper Foods, effective today, on the grounds of a material breach of your shareholder agreement. We have prepared a draft separation agreement. We have also prepared, on behalf of the company, a temporary restraining order that we'd ask the court to enter ex parte to prevent the disclosure or use of any confidential information that may be in your possession. Vivian would like me to walk you through the timing. There was a long pause. The long pause was not, in retrospect, a long pause of mine. The long pause was Vivian waiting to see what I was going to do. Vivian was, in that moment, doing a private experiment on me. The experiment was, how quiet can Marcus be when he is being unmade? I sat down. The chair across from Vivian was a Windsor chair I had bought for $145 in 2019 from a guy in Andersonville who builds them in his garage. I had boiled the wood myself with my brother over a weekend in the fall. Vivian had thought the chair was silly. Vivian had also, occasionally, sat in the chair when no one was watching. I had never told her I had seen her sit in the chair. That was a thing I had kept for myself. I said, "How long has Vivian been planning this?" Bradford Halsey said, "I'm not able to answer characterization questions. I can tell you the agreement was finalized at 10:24 this morning." I said, "So the agreement was finalized before Vivian told me about it." Bradford Halsey said, "Marcus, I'm going to ask you to set aside the question of timing and focus on the documents in front of you." Vivian said, "Marcus, you should sign it. The terms are generous." I said, "Vivian, what are the terms?" Vivian said, 2 months of salary. A year of COBRA. A non-disparagement clause that goes both ways. A non-compete that is narrow but real. And the right to retain your vested equity, which, given the dilution in the last round, is approximately, she stopped. She looked at Bradford Halsey. She said, "Should we be having this conversation in front of him?" Bradford Halsey said, with great patience, "Vivian, he is a party to the agreement. He is, by definition, in front of him. I did not sign the agreement on the last Tuesday. I want to be clear about that. I did not sign it because Vivian had asked me to sign it, and the last time Vivian had asked me to sign something that mattered, in the spring of 2024, it had been a refinancing document that had, in retrospect, given her unilateral authority to dilute my shares. I had signed that one. I regretted signing it in the specific way that a person regrets the moment they handed a knife to the person who was about to use it on them. What I did on the last Tuesday was this. I closed the laptop. I set the closed laptop on Vivian's desk. I said, "Vivian, I am not signing this today." Vivian said, "Marcus." I said, "I hear you using my name in that voice. I am not signing this today." Vivian said, "Marcus." I said, "I am going to go pick up our daughter from saxophone. I am going to bring her home. Tomorrow morning I am going to call my attorney and we are going to talk about what you have just done, and what you are about to do next." Bradford Halsey, to his eternal credit, stood up. Bradford said, "Marcus, the company intends to file the ex parte motion regardless of whether you sign the separation agreement today. The clock begins now." I said, "I understand, Bradford. The clock begins now." I said it because I wanted to be polite. I said it because I wanted Bradford to remember I had been polite. I said it because I am, in the end, the kind of person who wants the people who are about to be witnesses to remember I had been polite. I picked up the closed laptop and walked out of Vivian's office. I stood in the long hallway on the 14th floor for what felt like 11 seconds and was, in fact, about 45. 45 seconds is the time a person needs to walk past 9 small conference rooms named after herbs and not cry in front of any of the people sitting in them. 45 seconds is the time a person needs to walk past the Rosemary Room where, in 2018, Vivian had told our entire leadership team she had loved me since the night she saw me across the ballroom of the Drake Hotel, and not also walk into it. I got into the elevator. The elevator made a sound I had designed myself in 2021 as part of a brand refresh because Vivian did not like the original sound. Vivian did not like the original sound because Vivian had begun, by 2021, to associate the original sound with the man who had chosen it, which was me. I rode the elevator down. I passed the lobby. 2 of my employees, A woman named Priya from finance and a man named Theo from operations, saw me walking fast and wide-eyed toward the revolving door, and Priya did something I will not forget for as long as I am a person who remembers things. She stood up. She did not come after me. She stood up. People who stand up at the moment they see their boss walking out of a building for the last time do not realize what they are doing. They are doing what you do when you see a flag being lowered. They are doing what you do when you see a thing being put into the ground. I got into my car. The car was a 2019 Subaru Outback I had bought used from a man in Oak Park because Vivian did not want me to drive a car that cost more than what some of our warehouse staff made in a year. It had 87,431 miles on it. I turned the key. I called Audrey's saxophone teacher from the parking lot. I said, "This is Marcus Adler. I'll be the one picking Audrey up today. Can you keep her with you until 4:15? The teacher said, "Of course." She said it in the voice of a person who has been teaching middle schoolers saxophone for 19 years and has, in those 19 years, learned to hear every possible thing a parent is not telling her. I sat in the parking lot of the building I had helped my wife build and I waited. The waiting lasted 7 minutes. I timed the waiting because timing the waiting was the only thing I knew how to do that was not yet broken. Audrey came out of the saxophone studio at 4:15. She saw the Subaru and she waved. She waved the way she waved when she was 7, with both arms overhead and her entire body involved in the wave. She was 12. The wave was no longer age appropriate. The wave was still her. I loved her for the wave. She got in the car. She had a Novasax case in her lap. She said, "Mom wasn't supposed to be back until Thursday." I said, "Yeah, Mom's back early." She said, "Did something happen?" I said, "How was the lesson?" She said, "Dad. Did something happen?" I said, "Audrey, do you want the truth or do you want the kind version?" She said, "I want whatever's going to be true tomorrow, too." I want to pause here because what Audrey said is the thing I am going to remember about this week for the rest of my life. I want to pause here because what Audrey said is the thing that should be hanging above every marriage in America, above every kitchen in America, above every conversation between a man and a woman who are pretending that the things they are doing in private are not, in fact, being heard in the rooms next door. Audrey was 12. She understood that there were truths that did not last past Tuesday and truths that did. She asked me for a truth that was going to last past Tuesday. I told her. I told her during the drive from Logan Square to our house in Oak Park. I told her in a Subaru with 87,431 miles on it. I told her in a voice that I had spent 11 years training for interviews with Series B leads and that I had, on this day, repurposed, in real time, for the most important conversation of my life. I told her that Mom and I were not going to be married anymore. I told her that the reason was not her fault. I told her that the reason was adult and complicated and I was not going to give her the kind version because the kind version was going to become, in 3 years, the version she hated me for. I told her I was not going to say bad things about her mother in front of her, ever, for any reason, including the reason that her mother had earned it. I told her that her mother and I were still going to be her parents. I told her that the company was going to be different now. I told her that I was not going to be sad in front of her forever, but that I was going to be sad in front of her some of the time, and that the sadness was not her fault either. She got out of the car at the house. She said, "Dad, can I have 12 minutes alone before you come inside?" She timed it on her watch. She had a digital watch that my brother had given her for her 11th birthday. She had set the timer for 12 minutes. She went into her bedroom. She closed the door. I sat on the front steps and I waited. In the 12 minutes I waited on the front steps, I received 4 text messages, 2 of which were from Vivian asking me to call her, 1 of which was from Tess asking me if I was okay, and 1 of which was from Henry Castellan, which read, in its entirety, "Marcus, call me when you can. It's about Vivian." I read the texts in the order I received them. I did not call any of them back. I sat on the front steps. The front steps were made of limestone. The front steps were a thing Vivian had insisted on because Vivian's father had a house in Lake Forest with limestone front steps, and Vivian had, in 2017, decided that the front steps of our Oak Park home were the kind of front steps that said something. The limestone was good limestone. The limestone came from a quarry in Indiana. I had negotiated the limestone myself. I had negotiated the limestone because Vivian had not, at that point, been yet the kind of person who negotiated the limestone herself. At 12 minutes and 4 seconds, she had rounded up. Audrey has always rounded up, which is the kind of detail you only learn if you raise her. She opened the door. She had been crying. She had also, somehow, in 12 minutes, brushed her hair into a ponytail. I have never understood how Audrey manages to do both of those things in 12 minutes, but I have made peace with not understanding it. She said, "Okay." She said, "Okay, I'm ready." She did not specify what she was ready for. She did not have to. I called Henry Castellan back at 5:11 p.m. from my workshop. I have a workshop at the back of the house that is, technically, a converted mudroom. I had put a desk in it in 2022 because Vivian had begun, by 2022, to convert my office upstairs into what she called the brand library, and I called, internally, the room where the part of me that had once worked in that house was no longer allowed to be. The desk in the workshop was the desk I had used in college. It was oak. It was the kind of oak that does not, in 2026, get made anymore, because the kind of oak that does not get made anymore is also the kind of oak that someone in 2004 had decided was the kind of oak that a person who was going to be somebody sat at. Nobody in 2026 was going to be anybody by sitting at an oak desk. I sat at the oak desk. The oak desk did not care. Henry picked up on the first ring. Henry said, "Marcus." Henry said, "Marcus, Vivian fired you today. We know. The board knows. The Series C lead knows. We have, in this very moment, an 84-hour window to either replace Vivian as chief executive or to dissolve the company and split the assets among the senior noteholders, of which I am one. I do not want to be one of the senior noteholders of a thing that has just been dissolved. I want to be a senior noteholder of the company you and Vivian built. I need you to tell me if you are able to come back in a different capacity. Not as her husband. As a different capacity. Tomorrow morning. By 10. With an answer. Henry, in his entire career, had not once called me on a personal cell phone at 5 in the evening. Henry called me on a personal cell phone at 5 in the evening because Henry did not trust the company phone system, because the company phone system was, as of noon that day, the phone system of a building that was in the middle of what the lawyers would later call a controlled decompression. I said, "Henry, are you asking me to come back to run the thing my wife just fired me from?" Henry said, "Yes." I said, "Henry, do you understand what you are asking Vivian to do?" Henry said, "Yes." I said, Henry. Let me ask you one thing. Are you asking this as the chairman, or are you asking this as the man I helped move his daughter into her dorm room in 2019 while you cried in the parking lot of a residence in Ann Arbor because your daughter had told you she was majoring in philosophy and you didn't know what philosophers did for a living and she had to explain it to you in a Panera Bread? Henry said, "As both." I said, "I'll call you tomorrow at 9. Henry said, "I need an answer by 10. The board meets at 10. I said, "Henry. I will call you at 9. I will have an answer at 9. I will not, however, be rushing the answer because the answer is going to be the answer that you are going to be holding for the next 11 years, and I would rather the answer be 75 minutes late than 45 minutes wrong." Henry said, "Fair enough." 9 o'clock. I hung up. I went back into the kitchen. Audrey had made a box of macaroni and cheese from a box that said, on the front of it, in cheerful orange script, the kind of thing a box of macaroni and cheese says when a box of macaroni and cheese is not aware that the family that is eating it has just had the worst day of its life. We ate the macaroni and cheese together. We did not talk during the macaroni and cheese. The macaroni and cheese was the last thing we did on the last Tuesday that did not involve any of the people who were about to decide, most of them without ever meeting Audrey, what the next 4 years of her life were going to look like. I called Daniel at 6:30 on the last Tuesday. I did not tell Daniel what had happened with Vivian. I told Daniel the question Henry had asked me. Daniel listened. Daniel does not, as a rule, interrupt. Daniel interrupted once during the call, which was to ask, "Do you want me to come over, or do you want me to not come over?" I told him to not come over because Daniel driving 38 minutes from his apartment in Bridgeport to my house in Oak Park would mean driving past the building on West Randolph where Vivian and I had kept, in a closet on the 3rd floor, a box of Audrey's baby teeth, and Daniel did not need to drive past that building tonight. Daniel said, "Marcus, listen to me. The question Henry is asking is the wrong question. The question is not whether you can come back. The question is whether Vivian can stay." I said, "Daniel, Vivian owns 43% of the company." Daniel said, "Marcus, listen to me. Vivian owns 43% because 3 years ago she went to a lender in San Francisco and used your jointly held shares as collateral to fund a hostile takeover bid against a competitor named Caro Foods that did not, ultimately, work. The lender closed the line. The shares went back to joint. The lender did not call them joint. The lender called them pledged but unencumbered at the time of enforcement. I know this because I was on the phone with the lender at 11:30 at night on a Tuesday in March 2023 while Vivian was, without telling you, spending a weekend in Carmel with the chief executive of Caro Foods. The chief executive had, in Carmel, made clear to Vivian that she was not going to be acquired. Vivian came home on Sunday and told you she had been at a yoga retreat in Tulum. The retreat was real. The retreat was also not the entire story. The retreat was the cover for the part of the weekend she had spent in Carmel with a woman named Hannah Birch, who is, today, the chief operating officer of Caro Foods. I sat down on the kitchen stool. The same kitchen stool. The kitchen stool had, in the last 48 hours, become the most important piece of furniture in my life. Daniel read me the filings. 41 pages. The kind of filings a person reads once and then reads again and then sits very still for a while. The filings made Vivian's plan no longer a suspicion. They made Vivian's plan a thing that had already happened. I said, "Daniel." He said, "Marcus." I said, "What am I supposed to do with this?" He said, "I think you are supposed to call David. David is my attorney. David's office is on the 32nd floor of a building on Wacker Drive. David has been my attorney since 2019. David's hourly rate is $985. David's hourly rate is, in my view, the kind of hourly rate that says, David is for the moments when you cannot afford to be wrong. David is for the moments when you cannot afford to be wrong. This was, I believed, one of those moments. I called David at 7:14 p.m. David answered. David always answers. David believes, as a matter of both professional principle and personal identity, that a phone call placed after 7 p.m. is a phone call that has, in its placing, already told the attorney most of what the attorney needs to know. David said, "Marcus." David said, "Marcus. Are you somewhere safe?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you somewhere Vivian cannot hear you?" I said, "I am in the workshop. Audrey is in her room. Vivian is in Zurich." He said, "Marcus. Vivian is in Zurich. Vivian flew back from Zurich at 3 this afternoon. Ranjit called your brother. Ranjit then called me. I have been waiting, since 5:15, for the phone to ring. I am, in fact, relieved that the phone has now rung. David told me 3 things. David told me the first thing, the legal thing, which was that the temporary restraining order Vivian's employment team had filed with the ex parte motion had, as of 6 p.m., been denied by the judge who had been randomly assigned the case, because the judge had, in a 4-page order written in a tone I would later describe as uncommonly direct, found that there was no specific, articulable threat of disclosure of confidential information and that the company's request was, and I am quoting from memory because David made me write it down, a maneuver that is more reflective of control than of compliance. David told me the second thing, the corporate thing, which was that he had, on my behalf, filed an emergency cross-motion to the board's planned dissolution vote at 10 a.m. the next morning, requesting a 24-hour stay to allow the board to receive what David called, in his style, an alternative framework for continued operation. The board had agreed. The vote was pushed to 10 a.m. Thursday morning. David told me the third thing, the personal thing, which was that he did not believe that Vivian had intended to destroy the company. David believed, and I am going to quote David here because David said this so carefully that I wrote it on a post-it note and stuck it on the wall above the desk in the workshop, that Marcus, your wife's plan was not to kill the company. Your wife's plan was to extract the company from you. Your wife has been, for what I believe has been at least 2 years, treating the company as an asset in a divorce proceeding she had decided to begin before she decided to begin it. The hostile takeover bid that failed in 2023 was the first draft. The German fund was the second draft. The Vesper Long Holdings entity, headquartered in Delaware, was the third draft. Each draft has, at its core, one thing in common. Each draft has, at its core, the assumption that you were going to not be paying close enough attention to notice the draft was being written. I said, David. Am I the kind of person who does not pay close enough attention? David said, Marcus. You are the kind of person who has been paying close enough attention for 11 years and has, since the spring of 2024, been overpaying close attention to the wrong part. You have, in particular, been overpaying close attention to the part of your wife that was still the person she had been in 2014. That person is no longer the entire person. That person is a piece of the person. The piece of the person that built the company with you is still in there. The piece of the person that has decided to take the company from you is also still in there. You cannot negotiate with only one piece. You are going to have to negotiate with both pieces, and the negotiation is going to be the hardest thing you have ever done, and you have, in my professional opinion, already begun it, which is why you called me. I said, David. He said, Marcus. I said, I am calling you back tomorrow morning at 7. He said, bring Daniel. I said, why am I bringing Daniel? He said, because Ranjit is also calling Daniel back at 7, and if we're going to keep Daniel between the two of us for the rest of this, we need to make the arrangement official. Daniel is going to be your inside man on the financial side of the lender. I am going to be your outside man on the legal side of the lender. Together, the three of us are going to walk into the board meeting at 10 a.m. Thursday with the kind of information the board has never seen before about what Vivian has been doing with the operating accounts of the company you and she built. And the board is going to make a decision. The board is going to make that decision in 90 minutes. The decision is going to be either to retain me as chief executive and remove Vivian, in which case we negotiate a buyout with Vivian that gives her a fair share and a clean exit, or to retain Vivian as chief executive and remove me, in which case I am going to be the guy who helped my wife build a 9-figure thing and ended up explaining to his daughter why the Subaru now has to be parked on the street instead of in the garage. I said, David. He said, Marcus. I said, I am not letting Audrey park on the street. Thursday morning. 10 a.m. The board met on the 14th floor, in the Cumin room, 2 doors down from Vivian's glass-walled office. I sat at the end of the table. Daniel sat to my right. David sat to Daniel's right. Henry sat across. Vivian was not in the room. She had been asked to wait in her office for the duration of the vote, because Vivian understood that the moment she was no longer in the room was the moment she was no longer in charge of the room. Henry called the meeting to order at 10:02. Henry said, Marcus, the floor is yours. I stood up. I had, the night before, in the workshop, written the framework on 6 sheets of yellow legal paper. The legal paper was the same paper I had been writing on every Sunday night for 9 years, and I had decided, somewhere between the third sheet and the fourth sheet, that the paper was going to be part of the presentation, because the paper was, in fact, the most honest thing on the table. I said, I am not, in this moment, a good person to ask to take over a company. I have just had the worst week of my life. My wife served me with divorce papers the same week she removed me from the company I helped her build. The week is not yet over. I am asking you to consider me anyway. I am the person in this room who knows what this company was supposed to be, and the person who wrote on a yellow legal pad every Sunday night for 9 years to figure out what this company needed to do to be that thing. I have those pads in a manila folder in my workshop. The folder is labeled, in my daughter's handwriting, Dad's Notebooks. They are not a business plan. They are a 9-year-old record of every Sunday night conversation I had with myself about what this company was supposed to be. They are the most honest thing this company has produced since 2018. They are also a thing my wife never asked me to throw out, never read, and never discussed in any board meeting. They are a thing I did on Sunday nights because Sunday nights were the only nights my wife was not in the same room as my desk. There was a long silence. Henry said, "Keep going." I kept going for 42 minutes. I did not present slides. I presented the kind of thing a person presents when a person has run out of things to fake. Sunday nights. Warehouse failures. Cargill renegotiations. Safeway contracts. A chair I had boiled with my brother in Andersonville. Every one of those yellow legal pads had, in the upper left-hand corner, in my handwriting, the words V, Tuesday. V was for Vivian. Tuesday was the day we had, since 2020, planned, in theory, to have dinner together without our phones. The yellow legal pads knew, before I did, that we had stopped having those Tuesdays in 2021. The board voted at 11:26. 7 in favor, 3 against, 2 abstaining. Vivian was informed at 11:31. Henry informed her, in person, behind the glass walls, while I stood in the hallway. I did not stay to watch. I was tired. I went home. I parked the Subaru. Audrey was in school. Daniel was on his way to Bridgeport. David was on his way back to Wacker Drive. Henry was on his way to the Series C lead. I sat on the limestone front steps. The limestone was still good limestone. Vivian did not, in any morally serious sense, lose. She made a series of decisions that did not, in the end, serve her, and that did not, in the end, serve the company. The decisions served the part of Vivian that had decided, somewhere between 2021 and 2024, that the only version of the company worth being part of was the version in which Vivian was the only version of the company. That part of Vivian was wrong, in the specific way a person is wrong when a person forgets that a thing two people can build together is always going to be more than the thing one person can take. Vivian and I have begun the kind of conversation two people begin when two people are no longer married but are still, for the sake of the 11-year-old daughter they share, going to be at the same Thanksgiving table for the next 6 years. The conversation is slow. The conversation is, on most days, 3 words long. The conversation is going to take longer than the board meeting did. But the conversation is happening. Because I did, in the Cumin room, in front of 12 people who were, for the most part, not yet on my side, the thing I had been too tired to know I was still able to do. I told the truth. The truth was a story a person tells at a kitchen table. Audrey came home from school at 3:15. She set her saxophone case on the kitchen island. She said, "Dad, did it go the way you wanted it to go?" I said, "It went the way it had to go." She said, "Are you going to be okay?" I said, "I am going to be okay." She went upstairs and came back at 3:19 with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed me one of the mugs. She sat at the kitchen island across from the stool where Vivian used to sit when she watched the markets open. She said, "Dad. Her stool is still here." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Are we keeping the stool?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "Okay." We sat at the kitchen island. We drank the hot chocolate. The hot chocolate was the kind a person makes when a person is 12 and has been quietly preparing, for the last 3 years, to be the adult in the room if the adults in the room forgot to show up. The adults in the room did not forget to show up. They did, however, take longer than I had hoped. The yellow legal pads were, somewhere in the workshop, in the manila folder labeled, in Audrey's handwriting, Dad's notebooks. The Willis Tower was, on the other side of the city, the same color it had been on the morning I had met Vivian at the Drake Hotel in 2014. I am not the hero of this story. I am also not the victim. I am the man in the middle of the story, and the man in the middle of the story is, on most days, the most exhausting version of the man to be, and on the worst days the most necessary, and on the days in between the man who sits on the limestone front steps and watches Audrey come home and sees, in her, the version of the company I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to build. That is the version with the truth in it. That is the version that is going to last past Tuesday. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If you have ever been the last person to figure it out, you are not alone. If you have ever been the man in the middle of the story, you are not alone. If you have ever boiled a chair with your brother in a garage in Andersonville, you are also not alone, and I would very much like to hear about your chair. Take care of yourselves. Take care of the people who are still on your side. Take care of the yellow legal pads. They are, on the worst day of your life, the only thing in your house that is going to remember what you were trying to do. I will see you in the next one.